Hey everybody, welcome to Watches with Dennis. It must be a Saturday because I'm live streaming. Of course, I do occasionally live stream on days that are not Saturdays, but today is indeed a Saturday. So we're doing a regular live stream. I'm not actually going to spend a lot of time though, as the description or the title of this video said, on new watch reveals for once. I wanted to do a little bit of discussion topic that I totally poached from a video I saw over with the Mad Watch Collector, and I do have a link to that video, but we'll get into that in a little bit. So in terms of getting caught up with what is going on, we have a few things to go ahead and touch on, but really quick before I get going, I see people are already saying good morning before I'm even signed in. So good morning, Kevin. Welcome to the live stream. Good morning, Matthew. And thank you, of course, for being a 99-cent club member. I like to call that out. Link for that is in the video description below. And Jason with Design Atelier. Greetings. Welcome. I caught a couple of your videos this week, in fact, but you're far more prolific than my abilities to consume. So anyway, very interesting. If you have not, incidentally, those watching have not checked out Jason's channel, go over to Design Atelier and give it a subscribe so you can be notified when he has new videos. He does a lot of watch reviews over there. Okay, so what have I done over the last week? I actually did get out a couple of pre-produced videos. I was actually going to have video. I'm trying to do more where I don't like getting out. All right, if you've seen most of my pre-recorded stuff, I usually will throw like a backdrop. Like I have a couple curtains. I usually just use a blue curtain. Really, really low rent. I mean, this is a small channel. We do things low rent here. And I string it across a bookshelf, and that's when this becomes blue instead of you seeing like the dresser and the pinball playfield and the TV and all that. So, but it's a pain because I have to get out a stand. I got to get out that setup, get out the lights. So I've tried to just use my webcam because I do have a 1080p webcam. So for some of the like first thoughts stuff, the thing is it's so light hungry. Like when I use a bigger camera, it doesn't need as much light to no longer get that grainy look. That's when it's dialing the gain up too much. So long story short, I did a couple of pre-recorded videos this week. One, I actually incorporated some footage of me talking. The other, it was so bad, I was just like, you know what? I'm just taking the video out and I made it audio only like I usually do. So the first one that the video was okay-ish on was about the new Piaget Polo 79. So some interesting discussion about that one. A lot of which given the look of it, and this is the thumbnail. I just loaded up the PNG file I made of the thumbnail. The very polarizing looking watch, so not too surprising that it actually has received a okay amount of discussion. Not a particularly popular video, but Piaget is not a particularly popular brand, so I'm not too surprised. But anyway, yeah, a lot of people had a lot of thoughts about. Some people hate this look. Some people love this look because it's so different from everything else. And just about everyone hated the price because it's like 73,000 US dollars. So given that, but actually there wasn't too many in the comments. If you go to the video and check the comments out, there's not too many commentary about really dialing into the pricing per se. It's more about whether they like the design aesthetic or not. So a lot of discussion about that one. So that's a pre-recorded video. If you want to check it out, it's on the channel. I don't have a link in the video description. I ain't going to that much effort. But you guys can go to the effort of smashing that like button. See, I remember to say it for once. All right, here's the other video that I put out a couple days ago. And this is a watch I was much more excited about. The video is also done a lot worse than the Piaget video, and the Piaget video has not done well. But that's not the point. The point is to talk about things that I find are interesting. And I think Zenith Chronomasters are interesting, even though I think we're going to get to the point here where they're feeling pretty samey. Maybe we're already at that point. But I think this was enough of a twist on the traditional Chronomaster Sport that it was worth getting excited about for a variety of reasons. And again, you can watch the video if you want to hear some more thoughts. That one's pretty short. I think it's under 4 minutes. But the main things that I think are interesting, of course, is they went titanium. They did grade 5, which, okay, it's a 5-figure watch at retail, so you would say they better, but it's still only about, I think it was exactly $800 more bracelet version versus stainless steel bracelet version of the Chronomaster Sport. So I thought that was titanium is not precious, and I get a little flustered with brands. Maybe I'm looking at you, Rolex Yachtmaster, that have decided that there's just like this huge premium on titanium. And I don't know where that comes from, other than people think it's exotic. In fact, I'm going to lean on that's the reason for it. If you watch TV with commercials, like if you watch, well, there'll be the Super Bowl tonight, but you watch football like I do, you get exposed to a lot of commercials. And one of those commercials is often the iPhone's commercial. And iPhone has been talking up incessantly how the case edges are titanium, like it's something special. And maybe if I wasn't into watches and titanium hadn't been done for years, maybe I'd be more excited about it. But I don't use iPhones, and I don't care if they're titanium or not. And I definitely know titanium isn't special. So anyway, here you go. They didn't exorbitantly mark it up. It is already a fairly expensive watch. I also like that they ditched the, you can see it here in the thumbnail image, that they ditched the ceramic insert and they went with a brushed titanium bezel. So it looks like the old El Primero Daytona. I hadn't thought about that originally because I was kind of like, I like this one because it looks less like the Daytona, which is the biggest problem I've always had with the Chronomaster Sport. I can't, it's tough to say because it's a nice looking design, but of course the Daytona is a nice looking design. So it is what it is. But some people might look at a Chronomaster Sport and say, oh, you couldn't get a Daytona, or like you didn't want to wait, or you couldn't afford it. So you ended up with a Zenith instead, which probably off-puts some people because they don't want to be known as going around buying homages. Like there's just some people love homage style watches and some people hate them. And I thought this was different enough, but I hadn't really thought, actually I did touch on it briefly in the video, but because it looks like such an old Daytona where they used to have the stainless steel bezel, I don't think most people are going to tie it in. So I think it's unique. And of course they've always got the tricolor registers. But anyway, overall, I just thought it was a really nice looking package. So so those are the two pre-recorded videos of the week that I did, but we're going to dive into the main topic of today. So full kudos to Mad Watch Collector, who I've subscribed to for a while, but I don't catch a lot of his videos. And I saw he had one about Rolex and Seiko. And again, the video description is linked, or not the description, excuse me, my video description has a link to his video. Now, a lot of his video, I think his video is about 15 minutes long. Much of it is actually talking about the history of Seiko and the history of Rolex, which isn't what I thought he was going to go into on that. Now, there are a lot of other videos out there that will go into the history of those brands, especially Rolex. So, I mean, you could use that one as a primer. And sorry, I'm opening my can of Coke. But obviously, if that's not your thing, you might want to skip through the video to get to the part where he actually talks about the poll that he did. And that's what I went ahead and duplicated because I was kind of curious because he has a very large channel and he had like 8,000 plus votes on people picking between Rolex and Seiko. If you could, I think he phrased it, I'll throw it up here on the screen in a moment, but he phrased it in a very keep one brand. And so I cited him as having seen that because some of you might have seen the same poll and voted in the same poll. And so I kind of asked the same question. And I did it as I actually found an Seiko Australia, so I could get the logo that said Seiko brands versus Rolex. And there's a reason for that. And I will dive into it in just a moment, but I will first get caught up with everything that the chat has been spamming because apparently a lot of you have been writing while I have been blathering away. So Jason says, I feel your pain. I shoot in a kitchen. Dishes need to be cleaned first. Yes. I have thought about actually doing the records in my kitchen and maybe using my patio door as a backdrop. But with the glare and then the audio, I worry about having to use a different setup on the gain because I get so much echo in there. Because I used to record one of my podcasts in the kitchen, and it was always a bit of a challenge to deal with the echo. So fortunately, my kitchen's not the most, this isn't the best sound friendly environment, but when I take the microphone and I can kick the gain down when I do up close, like I'm on no one cares, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I'm on a gain of 20 right now. So I can have this. I don't like to have the microphone in frame. So I can have the microphone out of frame and sit relatively away from it. When I'm recording like reviews, I'm up at the microphone and I lower the gain way down. And that is why on my review videos, in my opinion, my audio is much better than it is like in this live stream because I'm basically eating the microphone at that point. So anyway, those are struggles of content creation for those of you. And I do encourage anyone to experiment around and create content. It can be both rewarding and frustrating. Scott, welcome to live stream, Scott. And thank you for being 99-cent club member. Said, first thought on that Piaget. No, with a cryy face thing. Well, it's not for everyone, Scott, but it's for someone. Like Neff. Or maybe it's like, that is $279 for me. Okay. So for Neff, it's needs a little bit more of the 80s to be brought in. Thanks for joining in the live stream, Neff and Tuna. Hello. Thank you both. And thank you both for supporting the channel. And Koji, wow, we've got a whole, like all the 99-cent club members are in today. The Piaget Panini. Oh, Dennis, did I mention it was 80K? Yes, you did, Koji. I think you might have had a few replies to your comment. I try and be encouraging to people when you see those price tags. I try and give you other alternative options. Options that are just 50,000 instead of 80. I'm a generous host like that. That's trying how I need to do it. Now, Jason does note regarding my sniping about titanium and the iPhone. Extra manufacturing and tooling needed for titanium. That's it. Nothing special. So yeah, I mean, there are steps. I understand that someone would charge more for a titanium phone, watch, bracelet than a stainless steel. Totally get it. But I don't know about like $5,000 more, those sort of things, where I think it starts to get questioned. Hello, Underhay. Welcome to the live stream. Matthew says his first MacBook Pro, which was around 2003, was completely titanium in terms of its case. Apple has used it forever. Not sure why they're marketing it so hard now. If I were to guess, Matthew, it is because they did not have anything else to focus on. There always needs to be, I think, in Apple's marketing, there always needs to be a new focus, like a new sensor, a new camera. You remember, a lot of times it's the cameras, and most people honestly don't care. It doesn't matter how. Have you noticed this, by the way? I'll throw this out to you all. This is going to be a really free-form episode today. As just an interesting query for you all to answer. Have you ever noticed, like, the cameras have gotten better and better and better on these phones, but when you look online or you see video footage, everything looks like it was shot on a potato? Like, what are all these camera upgrades doing if we're still stuck with potatoes? I don't understand. So I think people don't know how to use the cameras anyway, so it doesn't matter how good they are. But anyway, Tuna notes that his phone and computer are cased in the highest grade of Chinese plastic. Hey, plastics make it possible, right? Oil and petroleum industry wants you to know that. And Neff, of course, notes that just 50,000. I used a day date as a counter, which also came up in the Piaget video about, hey, if you were looking at an all gold watch and you could get it at retail, like the 222 from Vacheron and the Piaget, those are not price competitive for all gold. You're paying for that design at that stage. You want to cut that price in half, you can get a day date in gold. You want to cut the price even further, you start giving up the gold bracelet, you can get all sorts of gold. You want to go used, you can get gold watches under 10,000 US all day. Just, you might have to, it might not say, it won't almost assuredly, unless you go small, say Patek on the dial or AP on the dial. But if you want to go Chopard or you want to go Parmigiani, Omega gold watches take and they make them. People forget, but the DeVille line often has gold watches. Those take a big bath on the secondary market. I think there was one I was watching for a while. I think they finally sold it. That the Watchbox 1916 company had of one of those. It was one of those commemorative DeVilles. Omega still has it on their website. It's like $15,000 US. They had it down official list under 6, I think, maybe under 7. And I'm sure you could have knocked another grand off of that. But anyway, just one of those things. And Jason notes, here is insider info. I got quoted $250 for a custom watch case, minimum order 500 units. Titanium isn't very special. Oh, the case would be titanium. Oh, you mean the case around the watch. Okay, I thought when you said that, I immediately thought like watch box, like an actual box to hold watches. And I'm like, I'm used to seeing like leather, wood, maybe plastic, but I haven't seen anyone want to store their watches in an all metal thing. That would be very, very interesting. Jason also says, ignore those people. We're all mature watch pirates. Words won't hurt us more than walking the plank. Yes, I don't have a pirate theme going on here. I haven't decided what sort of theme I should go with. Occasionally obnoxious Saturday streams with iffy quality pre-recorded videos in between. That's kind of like what I'm running with this channel. I actually have a scripted out, I think. Do I still have it? I'm looking through my papers now. I was listing up, I wanted to do a video of the types of different watch YouTubers that exist. And then I was too lazy to do the video, which I guess that's the type I fall into in that case. Tuna notes that Tissot even offers gold watches. Absolutely. Yes, they do. I've looked at a few of them. Because, hey, if you need a dress watch, gold is always a great choice. All right, so let's jump into the Seiko Rolex discussion. So let me go and show you the poll. I actually snapped both of them so you could see what the Mad Watch Collector did. I saw his video first, so then I went back and his poll's a little different than what it shows in the video because it's still living on. You can see I voted for Rolex in his to make it show up for me. So, which was just as well because Rolex needed the help. But so the first thing I noticed on this is just how different audiences can be. Now, note, I had like just under 70 votes in my poll, which is honestly pretty good for a poll that I host. And he had, 8,100 votes. So very, very, very different sizes of population. So setting aside statistical significance, obviously the sort of audience you have would probably influence how you would approach this question if you were to keep one, Seiko or Rolex. Now, you notice mine says Seiko brands. And the reason I did that is, as I noted, I watched his video first. I didn't see this poll. If I saw this poll, the way I would have interpreted it is that Seiko meant Seiko proper and Rolex meant Rolex proper, not the conglomerates. Okay. So in his poll, as you can see, those who are watching, if you're listening here, I'll say it out loud. A Mad Watch Collector's poll, 69% of people chose Seiko, 31% chose Rolex, whereas in mine, 67% chose Rolex and 33% chose Seiko. And of course, that'll change as people continue. The polls just run forever, basically. I don't think I can turn them off without deleting them. Okay, so given that, when I saw his video, I was surprised because it seemed, while he did mean just Rolex, not Tudor, just Rolex, with Seiko, he brought them all in. Credor, Grand Seiko, Orient, they were all cited. So to be apples to apples, that's why I went with the logo that says Seiko brands in the Seiko poll to make it clear. And I still had someone confused or question it in the comment section because someone had basically said that they would have chosen Seiko if it was Grand Seiko. And so I did reply, you interpret it how you want, but the way I've got it with brands is, yeah, you're voting for Grand Seiko, you're voting for Credor, you're voting for Orient, whatever you want, however you want to interpret it. It doesn't have to just be Seiko proper because of what I'm comparing it to. But that, I don't think it was a fair way to have done it. So obviously we all have to make our own decisions. So not being trying to be overly judgmental, but watching his approach, it would not have been my strategy. Or if I had gone that route, I would have included Tudor. I would have, because you're basically, you're taking a whole host of tiers with Seiko and throwing it into play against a one tier option with Rolex. And I think that's okay, even if if it's tier versus tier, it raises so many interesting questions. I think it's okay, even if you said Seiko versus Rolex, so Seiko proper, because even though you're talking very different price points, that's part of the push and pull of if you were to keep one brand, where I think a lot of the logic goes into play. Anyway, I just thought it was pretty interesting in that regard, because there's just so much. He ended up bringing in, and I, by virtue of that in my poll, am bringing in a lot of different things when you start saying, okay, well, with Seiko, you've got really competitive pricing. And with Grand Seiko, you've got really competitive finishing. And with Orient, you've got super affordable pricing comparatively, compared even to Seiko. So it becomes something more interesting, something different. And that's kind of where we're gonna go ahead and talk about. So actually I wasn't sure if I was going to show you any websites, but I did load up all the websites for all of these, and even Tudor, even little Tudor gets to be loaded up. So let me see. I have to stop some screen shares and do some swaps. So while I'm doing that, I will get ready to get caught up on the chat, but I think you'll temporarily see Seiko pop up here. There you go. You do, but there, you don't have to see it anymore for a little bit. So, tuna notes, Credor and Grand Seiko are different animals. Absolutely. And that's where I wasn't sure. That's where I wasn't a big fan of the strategy, but since I'm basically mirroring, I wanted to do the poll because I because kind of like like Jason here in the live chat for Design Atelier. Like Mad Watch Collector does a lot of I think he does a lot. Again, I don't watch him as much as I watch Jason. But I think he does a lot of micro brands, a lot of like he's got more mainstream brands as well. But he does a lot of Seiko videos. So a lot of his videos are on the affordable end of the spectrum. My reviews I don't do very many reviews, right? I've only ever reviewed watches I own, and I own a spectrum of watches. I own luxury watches and I own more affordable watches. And so I'm my range on the review side is somewhat broad, but I do spend more time talking about luxury watches because they tend to get more attention in print media. And that's what I often use to build these live streams out of, is we often are talking about the recent releases. And while I do go out of my way to make sure I include things like Baltic when they have releases, and I talk Seiko quite a bit, I do spend more time, I think, in bulk talking about the latest stuff that has come out of Cartier or Tudor or whatnot. And there are a mix of reasons for that, but that's just kind of where the people that come in ask questions about. Those are the topics. We only on occasion get people coming in asking about micro brands, which makes sense because I don't know anything about micro brands. It's a whole, I don't know if my brain could handle adding that on top of everything else I've tried to learn about the mainstream brands. So there are some really strong micro brand channels out there that focus on that. But that's why I wanted to do the poll, was because I think my audience is going to skew more on knowing and favoring quote unquote luxury level brands. And that might cost Seiko, but it's tough because even if I'm saying you get to include luxury side of Seiko, now it's more competitive because people will tell you like dollar for dollar, you get more finishing and such out of a Grand Seiko than you do most of the Rolex watches. And then Credor, as is noted from Tuna, very different beast in and of itself. All that being said, most people haven't experienced Credor who are in this channel. Like, have any of you ever owned a Credor? I think Koji has one. I don't know if anyone. I don't memorize your collections. I don't know if anyone else who's actually watching live right now has a Credor or has ever had one. But if you have, let me know. It would be interesting to talk about. So let's go over like pros and cons on why one might side with these, and we'll go through the various entities. So Jason notes that he felt Tudor should have been included. It's needed to be a level playing field. We will talk about that, even though I did not emphasize that in the poll. So let's go ahead and let's start with Seiko proper. So when I mean mainline Seiko, I say Seiko proper. It's kind of like when I might say Swatch proper, and when I'm trying to distinguish Swatch the brand from Swatch the Swatch group. Easier said than done, or maybe easier done than said. So, okay. Seiko proper. Strengths, a lot of them. Very, very diverse look to a number of, they have a lot of lines, and the lines look different, right? You've got turtle case shapes, you've got the monsters, you've got the samurais, you've got all the stuff going on with the Seiko 5. And part of that then leads into, you actually have a fairly wide range of price points, going from quite affordable, which is a number of the Seiko 5 models that you might, wow, that's awfully flashy there. So, like you go under the Seiko 5 Sports lineup here at Seiko, and you see these actually can range a few $100s of spread between all these various watches, because you've got the limited editions, you've got most of the time they do stick with the 4R movements. In fact, I don't know if they ever go out of 4R in the Seiko 5 line. But you're talking bracelets versus straps, different price points for those, and of course, if they're limited, different price points for those. But by and large, there are a large number of SKUs available to someone who's getting into watches, getting into mechanical watches in particular, that Seiko has at their disposal, and so that's very, very attractive. Then you jump over to like I'm not going to hit all of these lines, but like the Pro Specs. So for those that those that long for the SKX days and all of that, people that want the performance-oriented professional watches, again, a lot of mechanical choices. A lot of these are sub 1,000 US dollars. Not all of them. They do have some prospects that go up even higher because they do a mix of movements in these. Some of them are 4R, some of them are 6R. I have a Prospex. It's a 4R Prospex. Some are limited, some are not. They've got, obviously, like you see on the screen, they've got the GMT complication. A lot of dive watches occupy this space. They've also gone around and they have chronographs available to you. Their Prospex Field Watch line, for those of you who can stand cathedral hands, not me, but the rest of you, very, very popular competitor to Hamilton for a lot of individuals. So again, what I'm sort of saying with this is that there's a lot of diversity that you can get into. It's very easy for someone to fall into, I'm going to call it the trap. I'm going to be a little judgmental. I'm going to call it the trap of being the Seiko exclusive collector. If you ever go online and search for state of the collection videos, and those can be fun to watch. I like watching all sorts of different ones. And sometimes when I'm just chilling, reading something, I'll put those on in the background. But it is interesting to see how many people go to the trouble of doing that, maybe go to the trouble of having a YouTube channel, even if it's just like mine, just like a hobby channel. But they're basically all in on Seiko and maybe very little, if anything else. But I'm going to go ahead and show King Seiko. I love this design. I hate the price point. But again, they have models now with 8R movements and stuff in Seiko proper that have decent performance. They've got decent finishing. So a few $1,000s into what I consider luxury watch space territory. So these are all big positives that I think someone could go and look at that Seiko v Rolex and say, you know what, I'm going to choose Seiko because you get a huge range, a huge disparity in pricing from affordable to what would, I guess, broadly be considered entry-level luxury. And you get the different fit and finish along that spectrum. And you can do it all in that one brand. So if only one could exist, there's a pretty strong argument to say it should be Seiko, because Seiko just is offering you so much more variety. It would be able to appeal to more price points and thus more people than Rolex, where Rolex starts at, you could say, maybe entry-level luxury. I would probably argue at this point, intermediate-level luxury. I don't think you can get at retail a men's sized or branded model of Rolex under 7,000 US at this point. I don't think so. Maybe there are some above 6 and under 7. But I think once you hit the 36 millimeter, you're basically operating like around 7,100 plus at that point. So obviously that rules out a lot of people who would never spend $7,000 on a wristwatch. So anyway, I think that's an interesting one to point out. But so anyway, so that's my thought on Seiko proper in terms of an argument. But let me go ahead and get caught up on chat, and then we'll jump over to Rolex after that, because that would be the one well, you saw I had to pick one when on the Mad Watch Collectors one, and I clicked on Rolex, which is interesting because I own one of both brands, so I'm not particularly enamored by overwhelmingly by either. Though I have looked at more Seikos than I have, but there are price reasons, of course, for that. All right. Koji, this is back when I said that I knew, or I was pretty sure, I knew he had a Credor. I assumed he still did. And he says, yes, it is the GCBE 993. Very thin hand-wound movement. Tuna note, Seiko does a quartz line that makes the 5 look expensive. Yes, and I didn't even touch on the quartz, and I honestly probably should have. In fact, I won't even say probably. I should have touched on the quartz. Then there was a time, Seiko is like the pioneer of quartz movements. In this day and age, as unfair as it may be, I think if you're thinking Japanese quartz, if you're me, you think Citizen, because they, especially in the United States, they have stuck so much more with the quartz movements, and they're doing more mechanical movements at this point. But anyway, you heard me typing in the background. That is because I was going to go ahead and show. This is a quick search I did for the GCBE 993. So if you want to take a look at that Credor, this is someone's where they're showing it off. So you can take a look at that while I go ahead and catch up on more chat. Jason writes, I don't want to do a state of the collection video yet. I don't consider my watches a collection yet. Yeah, I don't even know if technically I really meet the definition of a collector. because I've seen some people really harp on this, where they'll say, a collector, you get them and you keep them, right? You're collecting. If you're buying and selling, getting rid of watches when you bring in more watches, and I've done that with a lot of watches. I'm not really a collector. I'm an enthusiast. Potato. I ain't getting hung up on language like that. So as far as I'm concerned, if I own like 3+ of something, then I collect it, and I don't care if it revolves. My pinball collection revolves, evolves, modifies over time, slower than my watches do, but that's mostly because they're so heavy. But I mean, I change them up. I don't have my original games anymore. They're all long gone. So, but I've been a collector the entire time. But it all depends on how we as individuals want to go ahead and approach it mentally. So, yeah, there's not really a right answer, I guess, would be my thought. Others would probably disagree. Underhay said, I voted Seiko mainly for the innovation, fantastic high accuracy quartz, spring drive, their new mechanical high beat escapement, added to the old Astron first quartz, and the first auto chronograph. All very good points. And actually, I think Mad Watch Collector, I don't know his first name. I'll keep calling him Mad Watch Collector. I wasn't going to spoil it. I guess I will. He's got enough viewers. I'll spoil it. Yeah, he picked Seiko as well. I don't think that was in any way surprising given how many he owns, but he really focused a lot on the innovation that Seiko has, and Rolex does not have as much innovation. Rolex wasn't the first at very many things. They were often early as an adopter of many, many things. The biggest credit they would probably get is their efforts towards water resistance. They were a strong pioneer in that space, if not always the first at it. But obviously, Seiko just has a lot more at their disposal in terms of what they've developed. And a lot of that has to do with how those brands formed. But again, that's getting well outside the scope of what I want to talk about today. Tuna says, this is a big problem that Seiko have. The price points are all over the place. Mall shoppers get confused. And actually, that's something worth touching on. Koji said, I'd do a state of the collection vid, but even watch enthusiasts would most likely find it too boring. State of the collection videos, from what I've seen from anyone's channel, generally are the strongest performers. So like if you were ongoing and hosting stuff, it's actually a good format to do. Boring. I mean, as long as you do up close, people won't watch porn. So as long as you do up, because my first time I actually redid my very first state of the collection video because I was holding them up like this and talking, and people are like, I want to see you. We want to see up close. So as long as you make sure you do up close footage of the watches, you might be surprised. There will be people that have all sorts of collections and yes, some will find it boring, Koji. not to depress you, because we all have certain things. I find it very boring when I sit there and I watch someone show me their 5th Seiko turtle, because to me that's not any way I would ever want to collect. It's like a bunch of samey looking watches. But I also really am big in brand diversity, and there are other people that are more than happy to have a collection of 12 watches and 80% of them are Rolex. And I think that's super boring, but other people are like, each one's different, and each got different things. That's the exciting part of it, is we all just have these very drastically different tastes. So Tuna notes, quartz was and is huge for a good reason. Absolutely. I still look at quartz watches. I was actually looking at some Citizen watches yesterday. So Neff notes his fondness for the Credor. Underhay also compliments the Credor. And Koji's actual collection, I think, including that Credor, are featured on Hodinkee. There is an article from a few years ago where they did a piece on him and his watch collection. That's how I remembered he had a Credor. And Scott says, Tuna is spot on. When a blog to watch makes a game of guess the price of the Seiko, you know that they may have a problem with pricing disparities. And now Jason's going, damn it, now you're convincing me to make a state of the collection video. I'm assuming not make his own version of a Seiko turtle. But hey, why not both, as the little girl would say. Yeah, no, I just think they're fun to do. And I do one once a year. The only thing I kind of kicked myself is I felt I did mine too early in 2023. I had so many watch change ups. I wanted to do it, and it worked out because I didn't acquire any more watches after I did it. I don't think until the start of the new year. So, because I told people I wasn't going to buy another dress watch for the rest of 2023, and I technically paid in 2023, but I made sure, or as close as I could, that it wouldn't come until 2024, which it did not. So And Underhay also noting he would love to see a Design Atelier State of the Collection video. They want it. Give the people what they want, Jason. Help the people. All right, Rolex. We will get into the other categories of the conglomerates here after this, but let's go ahead and jump into Rolex because that's the most direct comparison to the Seiko proper that people are going to think about. All right, so positives for Rolex. With Rolex, you very much know what you're getting into in the sense of, as was pointed out with Scott noting A Blog to Watch and the game they play about Seiko price guessing on their podcast. That is not an issue with Rolex. With Rolex, everything makes sense. They do not overwhelm with SKUs. They're not a Seiko. They're not an Omega. They're not a Seiko. They actually keep a fairly tight, or at least it feels like they have a relatively tight leash on the number of models. Obviously, the model lines are pretty easy for people. Oh, I know plenty of people who don't buy Rolex who can readily spout out their what model lines, say GMT Master 2, Submariner, the Deep Sea, the Date Just, the Day Date, the Oyster Perpetual. And then those that want to be quirky, the Milgauss, bring it back, the Milgauss. So it's just, even though there actually are, I think there are more SKUs in Rolex than people realize when you start thinking about the Date Just in particular and all the different dials that they do and the different sizing that they do. It actually is a bit broader than I think you immediately think of. But part of that is because when people say Rolex, generally they are talking about, in collector circles, they're talking about the professional line. So we're talking Daytonas and Submariners and GMT Master 2s, even though they probably sell more Date Justs than anything. So it's interesting, but it all makes sense. Like a watch that is smaller is cheaper than a watch that is bigger. That is not true at Seiko. It's when you start with the Oyster Perpetuals at retail, those are going to be cheaper because they don't have dates. And then the Date Justs are going to be more money. And then, the Explorer is going to be cheaper than the Explorer 2 because the Explorer 2 has 2 additional complications, a date and a GMT function. It all makes sense. Steel is cheaper than titanium, is cheaper than gold, is cheaper than platinum. It all makes sense. And making sense means a lot to people because they understand what's going on. Another big advantage to a lot of people for Rolex is, and I don't think you can, when you're talking about watches that are starting at around $7,000 on the cheap end, value retention does matter. And I know it gets frustrating to people when we will have conversations, and sometimes there will be people that will be pretty adamant, like that's a big factor in terms of how they collect. It's not my factor in terms of how I collect, but only because I will buy used. So for me, I don't care that, like the Parmigiani Tonda, Calpa Tonda 39. I've seen it listed a couple ways. The Parmigiani I got, the weird one that all of you thought was weird. Well, like that back in like 2012 or whatever, according to their little catalog, that MSRP'd at like $15,000 US. So I go and I buy it at what? It was not even half. It was over half off when I got it used, obviously. But so it's taken its hit. I'll do that with watches. I did that with in today's watches, the Moser Pioneer Center Seconds. They sell for thousands less used than they do new. And it's hard to find them gray, so you buy them used because they don't make very many. But that's the thing. With Rolex, they hold value very well. I would not have any qualms about going, even if it was going to take some loss because of how well the value retention is. I have no qualms about going and buying a Rolex at retail. In a lot of cases, you want to. If you're going to try and get one, you want to go and get it at retail. So that's really, it's nice not to worry because, and we've seen this, I got to throw up my pinball analogies. We see this in pinball now. During the pandemic, any game you bought, you could sell more used than you bought new because people were desperate to get games and there were supply chain issues. It's not true anymore. So would you buy a Stern pinball machine and take a $500 loss? Or are you going to buy a Jersey Jack pinball and take a $2,000 loss? And that's what happens with watches all the time. If you're willing to buy used, it's no problem. If you are someone who worries about buying used, and there are people who will never buy used, they're terrified about getting ripped off. They're terrified about like a super clone tricking them. There are all sorts of reasons. You can buy Seikos all day long, gray market and used, and save a ton of money because those things lose value pretty severely. And that's why you see Seiko, I think, turn to a lot of limited editions in a desperate attempt to try and preserve some valuation to their watches. It doesn't really work either because they turn out like 15,000 of a model and call it limited. But it is what it is. So that's another point in favor. And then the third thing is the robustness, I think. And that's probably the big thing that why, like, if I had to just pick one, and so much about Seiko I like, but Seiko proper, back to Seiko proper. Their QC, you get what you pay for. And the problem is it feels like they've let their QC slide. Whereas with Rolex, you get 10-year service interval recommendations, robust warranties. The watches are really hardy. They're also just as easy to get serviced as Seiko. Like Rolex might have their, walled garden of purchasing and stuff, but independent watchmakers can readily work on Rolex watches. It's not like some grand complication from Patek Philippe. So for those reasons, so I could see why someone would say Rolex over Seiko in our matchup. And in fact, I would ultimately, I think I would go ahead and say that. But it's really tough. Seiko's done so much, and I look at more Seikos than I do Rolexes, but a lot of that's price driven, of course. But I mean, that's just how it is. So anyway, that's why I think it's an interesting matchup, even though they operate in very different pricing spheres when we talk Seiko proper versus Rolex, just not Tudor Rolex. So interesting. I think it's an interesting question. So that's why we decided to have the discussion, or I decided we would have the discussion. Nev says the Explorer 1 price makes no sense. Well, it makes more sense than Seiko pricing. Play your own game of guess the price of Go to the Seiko site, one of the shopping sites sometime, and just start looking at particular watches, maybe load them in separate tabs and start guessing for yourself. Like, what is this watch going to be listed for? The only rhyme or reason to Seiko that I can find is the movements will give you a general sense. Like 4Rs are cheaper than 6Rs are cheaper than 8Rs. That's about it. And the disparity in the use of the movement in like the range of watches that might use a 6R is humongous. So it's very, very strange. But I don't understand why watch brands will say, okay, we're doing gold. And let's take the day date. How much is the value of the gold in a day date, a full bracelet day date? I don't know. It can't even be $5,000. So why is it not just $5,000 more than a date just? And that's not just Rolex. Like all the brands do that with gold, with precious metal. There's this huge markup way beyond the value of the metal. And those are soft metals, so I can't imagine it's a big tooling issue. But whatever, we don't know. Scott says Seiko released 289 models last year. That would be another negative. Whereas people complain that Rolex doesn't innovate enough, evolve, give you new things that you want. Does Seiko do too many? Maybe. Well, a thing that could be seen as a niceness or a negative of Rolex is the pedigree of the lineage. The Submariner today looks like a blingier version of a Submariner that Sean Connery wore, 50 plus years ago. You don't always feel that when you look at other watch brands, Seiko included, which is why I think you're starting to see Seiko do a lot more of these vintage inspired watches. But that's not just them, obviously. Lots of brands are really leaning in on vintage. One could argue Tudor's entire model is built on vintage at this point because that's what sells. Tuna says, comparing Grand Seiko to Rolex, that would have made common sense. And we'll actually jump into that. But I want to touch on Orient a little bit before that. Scott notes he prefers the Rolex bracelet. Rolex to this day remains my favorite bracelet that I have ever worn, and I've not worn their new ones. Tudor has some pretty nice bracelets as well. But the Tudor watches I had were not special enough to have the fancy ones. Jason's going to go back to work. Thanks for dropping in. I hope it goes smoothly for you. And Tuna says Seiko and their QC issues let the side down. Yeah. And again, I don't know well enough on people who are Seiko collectors if that's really just something that plagues the 5 line. Like if you start getting into the stuff with the 6 and 8 Rs, are the bezels and chapter rings aligned? Is it fixed? I don't know. Mine was okay that I got, but it was a 4-hour movement watch. So I was like, I don't know if this is going to turn out. It was cheap enough that I was okay with the risk. Now, if we're talking about the conglomerates, let's briefly mention Orient. I don't think we need to spend very much time on Orient because Orient, unlike Seiko, has constrained itself a lot better in terms of its price tier. It feels very much like when Seiko acquired them, they said, okay, you're going to keep your design language. You're going to keep your own in-house movements. You're basically going to do your own thing. You have one job. Broadly speaking, your price points are to be cheaper than Seiko price points. You are going to be the true entryway into mechanical timepieces. And that's what most people turn to them for, mechanical timepieces. I have an Orient. I don't wear it a ton, but I do wear it regularly. And they make a nice high quality watch. You hear less QC complaints about the dials and such out of Orient. On paper, Orient's in-house movements have less deviation on timekeeping than like the Seiko 4R line. In practice, I have heard most people find the Orients are more out of whack than the Seikos. In my one instance of my one Seiko compared to my one Orient, that was also the case. They were both in spec, but the Orient was worse at timekeeping. And I actually did end up self-regulating. I have a video on the channel somewhere showing how I self-regulated. It's an easy watch to regulate. But you tend to hear Orient mostly about just like their staples. Like they do turn out new watches, and they got criticized last year because they did a dial misprint, which was a pretty big blunder on one of their watch releases. But in the sport line, you mostly hear about the Komatsu. A lot of people talk that watch up a lot. And then what budget dress watch list isn't complete without the Orient Bambino? The Bambino is the one you always hear about. In fact, I almost hate the Bambino. It actually looks really nice. I wish it didn't have the date window, or the color matched it. But of course, they didn't at the price point. But I'm rambling. I want to hate the Bambino because it gets referenced way too much, in my opinion. Far, far too many people are pushing people into Bambinos. We need to push people into other low cost dress watches just for variety. There's just going to be those. I just imagine that like hordes of high school and college kids out there. All of them have Bambinos for like prom night and go into the theater and whatever stuff, when they put on the college productions. I'm just imagining everyone's just got these cream colored Bambinos. I'm just like, guys, there are other affordable dress watches. I promise it's not just the Bambino. But we'll do Grand Seiko next, but really quick, see what you guys have been saying. So Neff says, I much prefer Orient to Seiko. Okay. Not many people would pick that. I might do that as a poll. I've thought about it before. They're just doing like, which you like more, Orient or Seiko? I think it would be overwhelmingly Seiko, but I'm not sure. Tuna says, Orient do a great line of watches for their price point. And I think a lot of people might look to that and say, Orient does what Seiko did. But they have their own language, so I don't want to be like overly dismissive. I do respect the fact that Seiko let Orient keep its identity. And I mean, in some ways, I do feel like Orient gets the short end of the stick in the sense that I'm not sure they do any new movement development. I don't know if they ever are even working on movements, or it's just kind of like, nope, that's your price point. Deal with your old tech and live with it. Whereas we do see Seiko constantly trying to come out and is coming out with new movements all the time. Tuna says, for my sins, I have an Orient Sun and Moon. And I didn't even touch on Orient Star, which is like the more higher. There is a little bit higher end version. Actually, it's significantly, I believe, higher end than the regular Orients. But I don't really know much about them other than some people do seem to adore them a great deal. All right, so Grand Seiko. My first Seiko was a Grand Seiko. I don't have it anymore. I had one of the Heritage line spring drive watches. And this is where I think a lot of people start saying you're competing with Rolex. Or if you're not, you're probably saying, well, here you're competing with Tudor. And I see it both ways. So the thing with one of the reasons why I'm not huge into like, when it comes to collecting watches, why am I not someone that wants like a whole bunch of Rolexes? And I started with a couple Rolexes and I let my OP go. I still have I have one other that I would like to get, and I've talked about that before. But the reason is the case shape. All the really popular Rolexes are in the Oyster case. The problem with the Oyster case isn't that it's not a great case. It is. It looks good. It's comfortable. It's robust. And it looks the same to me because it's the same case in watch after watch after watch. And so when I see the profile of a Rolex, I, one, immediately know it's a Rolex or that someone's trying to make it look like a Rolex. And two, I'm like, well, I like the case. I like the cases to be different. I like the looks to be different. And that's what I like about Seiko is, okay, yeah, all their turtles. That's why I don't understand collecting a bunch of turtles. But if you were like, I need a turtle and a monster and a samurai, I get that because they look different and more than just dial color. That's the problem with Grand Seiko. Excellent polishing, iffy bracelets. Okay, cool tech. I love their dial textures. Everyone loves their dial textures. But you start looking at them and they start looking the same. Look, textured dial in your case, power reserve towards the 7, 30 position, date at the 3, rinse, repeat. Oh, eventually they went in and they put the power reserve on the back in the same spot on all of them, which is understandable. It is, and this is probably from a Blog to Watch's podcast. I think it probably was Ariel Adams who said this. But the thing with Seiko that I think you see in Grand Seiko is they want to take that assembly line philosophy and apply it to watches. And the problem that they run into is people that adore Grand Seiko get one in their favorite dial configuration, dial color, dial texture, whatever. And then you try and sell them more watches, but they all look the same, except, oh, well, this is a different texture. All right, this one's birch, not snow. Okay. This one's blue, not pink. Okay. But once you got your favorite one, like, why would you keep getting more watches that the dial is the same on all of them? Like the dial, like the hands, the everything. It's just the texture and color that are changing. That's okay when the watch is under 1,000. It's not okay when the watch is over 4,000, in my view. I think that's where they struggle. But because of the Zaratsu finishing and the very interesting movements, the fact that they will do luxury quartz, not just spring drive quartz, but luxury quartz, that is where I think they get a lot of traction and do feel different in a lot of ways versus Rolex would, at least like in terms of some of the case stuff. Like they do more, it feels like they do more with metals and things like that. But, you know, with Rolex, the dials look pretty different. Like the Explorer and the Explorer 2, like the indices and all. See, that's part of the thing is I talked to you about the dial colors and the dial textures, but Grand Seiko, like all the indices are the same. They're doing them the same. It's because of their grammar of design thing that they do. And I love the way the grammar of design looks for one watch. I don't need it for 100. And so that's why I just think Grand Seiko struggles to have repeat customers who want to collect Grand Seikos. Setting aside the value retention and all the rest of it. That's just my theory on it. So, in fact, what one might compare Grand Seiko to more, though, would be Tudor. So, Tudor is obviously farming the vintage catalog quite a bit. Price points are extremely competitive on the entry-level luxury side. And this is, I think, Tudor's greatest strength. So, if you were saying we're voting Seiko, all of it, versus Rolex, Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, all of it, that's where Tudor really could bring a lot to the table because we've seen so many price increases, you know, Rolex and their incremental price increases, Omega, which has been jacking their prices up extraordinarily. When Tudor started to get popular, I thought that they were, and I still think Rolex is trying to position Tudor as a competitor to Omega. And Omega's like, no, we're the competitor to Rolex, and we're going to show you by just constantly raising our prices. So now Tudor is occupying a space where, you know, you might look at Grand Seiko and go, okay, I want that. Or maybe you got one and you're like, well, how many different iterations off the snowflake do I want? And then you can look over at Tudor and then you're like, okay, well, are they samey? Yes and no. Like if you're going Black Bay, obviously you see here, you have these basic same dial configurations, kind of like I was criticizing with Grand Seiko. But when you look from you look like 3 feet away, it starts to get a little bit different, like different bezel colors because they have bezels. And you get the, in addition to the different dial colors and stuff. And then you start going on and start looking at more case materials and strap changes. They're not all on the samey looking bracelet. And then you start moving further away from the Black Bay and you start getting hands that aren't snowflake. And you get things like the Ranger and Then, of course, they've got the Royal line, the 1926, which is a watch I owned, which was actually a very nice, very thin watch. They do actually have a lot there. Not as much variety in the popular stuff as maybe even a Rolex, but it brings something different and then much more tooly, whereas tool watch oriented. Whereas with Grand Seiko, they do have a tool watch line in terms of a collection, but most of what they're known for are these more dressy sports watches, right? Grand Seiko deals in the Datejust. That's kind of like what they do, their version of the Datejust. And so you get these basic iterations of watches that look fairly elegant, whereas Tudor's like the opposite. Yeah, okay, they've got like this Claire de Rose watch for women, but for however many Tudor Royals and 1926s they sell, we know where they're making money. They're making money on the Black Bay and they're making money on the Pelagus. And so that's why I think it broadens up quite a bit, especially just in terms of people wanting to get into luxury watches. And by in, I don't mean like as new people. I just mean like at a lower price point. It just offers a lot without, in a lot of ways, people prefer these two Rolex watches for how they, just how tooly they are. Like one of the biggest complaints I've seen people have with Rolex is that, especially when they jumped from the 5-digit references to the 6-digit, that it feels like Rolex has gotten too luxurious. Like it's too bling. It's too, we don't want to scratch it. Whereas instead of just being like one of the best damn tool watches that's ever been invented. And I think Rolex actually, I think like the robustness is actually still there, but at the price points, who wants to chance it? But with Tudor, I think a lot of people are like, all right, this is a lot of money, but it is a tool watch and it's back kind of where Rolex used to be. And people are like, I will wear this. I will swim in this. I will go and work in this. I will mow the yard in this. And that's a good selling point. Not to mention, once the watches are out for about half a year, again, you buy it used, you buy it gray, you can save money off of even the retail prices, which are fairly competitive for what they are. My biggest gripe with Tudor is their fondness now for using display case backs on that ugly, Spartan, undecorated movement. Either put a close case back on those things or start machine finishing them. Pick a lane, but pick one. I don't want to look at that crap. At that price point, they should do better or hide it like Rolex does. Scotty, welcome to live stream, says Tudor is occupying a space that I appreciate. And good morning. Yeah, well, good morning back to you. Yes. And the last of our, collection of the verses would be, of course, throwing in Credor, which again, other than Koji, no one knows anything about. So Credor is I've tried to research Credor, and it's very, very difficult to find a lot of information that I can interpret and understand, or even really shop these watches. So I'm at some Seiko boutique site, I think in Australia, that's showing this. So I'm assuming these are Australian prices, but I don't know anymore what's going on. They're kind of like two levels of Credor, like as near as I can tell. It's kind of like Mont Blanc. So you have Mont Blanc, which makes the relatively affordable, I'll say entry-level luxury Mont Blanc, which is kind of like priced around Tudor. And then you've got the Minerva factory with like Minerva branding on the dial, which are like day-date prices, like tens of thousands of dollars. So that's kind of like that with Credor. So with Credor, you see some of these watches, which are in these dollar amounts, are actually quite approachable, right in line with that sort of Tudor, between Tudor and Rolex, that Grand Seiko space, we'll say. Like this is kind of in the Grand Seiko space in terms of pricing. And okay, so this is quartz watch, but it's an 18 karat gold watch. So, okay, so 5,800 Australian. Whereas, it's part of the Seiko site proper right now. I'm seeing like 5 watches. So I want to find a fancier one. So let me see if I can fancy Credor watch. And let's do a Google search for that. What do you think? What would be a fancy Credor? All right, here's one. That's eBay. That's not gonna be any fun. I wish I'd preloaded this. I forgot that I can't just go to a website and look at all the Credors because Credor has to be. All right, that's a big strike against Credor. They make it hard. This must have been how it was like pre 2010 trying to get Grand Seiko when they were just doing stuff in the Japanese market. All right, here we go. We got an article from Monochrome. Here you go. Now, then there's this Credor, which is what I think of when I hear Credor. And I see Tuna noting Credor is rare outside of Japan. Koji's telling me to look up the Ichi too. So what did I look up? I don't even know. We'll look up the Ichi series. This is not an Ichi. This is something else. So what is this? The GBBY 983, the dream of the butterfly. Well, all right, that would make sense because look at all these butterflies. But this is some really elaborate stuff. Like Credor, so Credor has like this mass-produced, they don't make a whole ton of it, so mass-produced is a bit of a misnomer, but they have like their mass-produced Mont Blanc line, and then they've got like their hand-constructed, ultra-high finished Minerva line of stuff like this, which, you know, so you've got these fancy dials. What is this? It's 360,000 euros is how much this watch is. Of course, it's platinum and I'm sure limited. The Ichis. Okay, thank you. I had looked at the Ichis before because I look at them and I'm like, that looks like this. I saw this and I thought, oh, this must be an affordable watch. Look how simple it is. It's a time only watch. Looks like an enamel dial. Okay, they might command a little bit more for that. It just sort of depends on how you do it. But, you know, I mean, Breguet does enamel dials under what, 20,000, I think, retail. Well, definitely on gray. But that's another story about them. Nice movement. I always like how they do their little flower for the mainsprings on those. So, okay, nice, simple Credor to consider getting into. 59,000 euro. So it looks like it would be in competition with a Calatrava and some Breguet Classique. And in reality, you end up with this ultra expensive. Yes, it is platinum, but still, I mean, it's on a leather strap, so it's not like a platinum bracelet. But this is not enamel. Is what I was wrong about when I saw it. It looked to me like enamel. It's porcelain, and porcelain is a lot harder to do than enamel is. So that explains part of it. And then they're doing this, you know, 7R. I didn't even know there was a 7R caliber. 7R spring drive. So you've got just all this stuff, and they hand paint these porcelain dials. It's not machine painted. And so it's a really interesting brand. So in terms of like, if we were going purely off of hot horology, or however we would pronounce it, then Seiko versus Rolex as the conglomerates, then Credor could push over the top easily. You could maybe argue Grand Seiko with the Zaratsu finishing might look more impressive than the finishing of the Rolexes just in general. But if we bring in hand-finished Credor into play, you definitely beat Rolex. Rolex does not bother with that level of complication or that level of effort. It's too assembly line for it. So in that regard, that would be an instance where Credor could push it over the top if you would bring it into play. So Tuna says, yet more price point confusion. I had always thought that Credor was priced above Grand Seiko. I did too. It's like, is it Minerva Credor? And I know it's such a misnomer. If anyone catches the end of the video, they're going to be like, Minerva des Credor. And they're going to be like, that Dennis, he lied to everyone and poisoned the whole watch community, not understanding. Yeah, it's weird. It's like when we look at Seiko, there are Seiko 5s that are cheaper than Orients. But broadly speaking, Orient, the order is Orient, Seiko, Grand Seiko, Grand Seiko, Credor. But there's variance within the lines. The lines blur because the model lines blur on the pricing, which I suppose is inevitable at certain points. I mean, but again, looking over at Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, are there any Rolexes that are cheaper than Tudors? Yeah, like the all gold Tudor that Black Bay they did is more expensive than like the stainless steel Datejust. But it's very much the exception, not the rule. Koji says, in person, the Ichi 2 is ridiculous. What a movement. And Tuna notes, to Koji, if there was a clear line of price definition, it would help Seiko. And Koji also points out for these Ichis that these indices are also hand painted. And Tuna likes how beautiful this looks. Honestly, this would be a watch I would get. And then I saw the price. And I was like, oh, hell no. Hell no. I ain't even going to look at what these would go for used. It may very well be less, but it's not going to be less enough. Because, I mean, at almost 60,000 euros, 59,000 euros for this watch. I mean, even we were talking half, that's what, now we're around 30,000. Well, I mean, there are like used Longas and stuff I can get less than that are going to have more complications and stuff. I mean, never say never if it gets cheap. You know, you fall down the watch rabbit hole enough and you squirrel away enough money. Never say never. You know, liquidate the collection and maybe get it. But for what it is, it's not. I like looking at it, but it doesn't do enough for me at the price point. But what it makes me wonder is what else is out there with porcelain dials that maybe could be more obtainable. Though I don't know if there's any porcelain dial that's affordable. I think they're all in the luxury space. Enamel, different. No, I think there's some affordable approaches to enamel people have done. Koji says, I get it, Dennis. I think if we're priced around 25,000, it's more possible. Well, yeah. So let's say it was 25,000. That's a good comparison. So what are we competing against at 25,000? All right. Well, basic Calatravas are like 30. So you're now under them. You're kind of around the 1908 price. You want another interesting comparison? The Chopard, the LUC, the salmon dial and the lucent steel, the 1815 that came out last year, that's like 24, 26,000. Interesting because you're getting a precious metal here and you don't there. You get a much more intricate texture on the dial on the Chopard, but here you obviously have a much greater detail of hand finishing, like painting and the delicacy of porcelain. It's competitive. I think that becomes competitive. This might make sense for the effort that goes into it. I'm not saying that this is overpriced. I don't know enough to say it's overpriced. All I can tell you is it's too expensive for me. So it's probably too expensive for a lot of people. But Neff did note that Seiko did actually do an affordable porcelain dial. I did not know that. I'm always learning. And Koji says you can get a bit lucky from time to time with vintage porcelain dials, but a lot of times they're damaged. Yeah, the fragility, I would feel a lot better going for vintage enamel just because it is more robust. My understanding is there's certain risks to the baking process of making the enamel dials, but once those dials are made, they tend to hold up fairly well. But you know what's not holding up fairly well? This live stream. I'm running out of the ability to speak because my throat's getting too dry and I don't want to keep chugging my Coke Zero. So I'm going to call it here. We've gone long enough, I think. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you found this interesting. Decided to do something a little bit different than just go over the latest watch releases. If you enjoyed the video, please do click like. It'll help others find the recording once it gets fully processed by YouTube. And I'll plan to be back next weekend with some other topic of discussion. But until then, take care, everybody.